key achievement of the 1998 Good Friday Agreement was the creation of new political institutions in Northern Ireland. These institutions were designed with key principles of power sharing in mind, so that nationalists and unionists would have to work together in the day-to-day running of Northern Ireland. Although the power sharing institutions have worked as intended at times, there have been long periods when Northern Ireland has been left without a government because the institutions have collapsed. This problem appears to be getting worse. For 4 of the past 6 years, Northern Ireland has had no government because the institutions have been unable to function. There is much debate among politicians and in the media about whether the system of power sharing is fit for purpose. Some argue this system is broken and needs to be changed. Others disagree. But what do ordinary people think? Last year, the Institute of Irish Studies at the University of Liverpool, in cooperation with Queen's University Belfast, organised a deliberative forum, or mini citizens' assembly, to hear the views of a representative sample of the Northern Ireland population, including young people, older people, nationalists, unionists, and people from backgrounds which are neither nationalist nor unionist. This is what we found. We first asked people what they liked and disliked about the current system of power sharing, sometimes known as mandatory coalition. People tended to mention 2 related advantages. The first is that the system has presided over a period of relative peace since 1998. The second is that the government is inclusive of different political traditions. This is because seats in the government are divided between the political parties based on the number of seats they win in the Assembly. So, the system is proportional and fair. On the other hand, people had a lot more to say about the weaknesses of the current system. 3 main complaints emerged. Firstly, people pointed out that the current system of power sharing has created unstable government. By refusing to join the government, one party can hold the system to ransom and prevent every other party from forming a government. When this happens, there are no new policies, no budget, and no strategies for responding to serious problems facing everyday people. Secondly, even when a government does form, people felt cooperation between the parties is poor, and it appears like the parties are together because they have to be, not because they want to be. Thirdly, some argued that there is too much emphasis on nationalism and unionism. People who do not identify as nationalist or unionist complained that their views don't seem to matter as much, and this isn't fair. In the second part of the day, people learned about potential alternatives to the current system of government. One option would be a simple voluntary coalition. With a simple voluntary coalition, after an election, the parties would negotiate with one another to find out who wants to govern and who doesn't. The parties who want to work together form a coalition government, and the parties who don't form the opposition. This is different from mandatory coalition because with mandatory coalition, any party with a handful of seats is essentially guaranteed a place in government, and the larger parties usually have a veto over whether or not a government can form. With simple voluntary coalition, there would be no such guarantees and no vetoes. The parties who want to govern form the coalition, and the parties who don't form the opposition. Although people recognised some benefits of simple voluntary coalition, there were some concerns. People wondered whether this system could lead to only one community being represented in the government. For example, a government which only represented unionism, or a government which only represented nationalism. Even though this scenario is unlikely, because neither community has a majority of seats in the Assembly, worries about exclusion made people hesitant about simple voluntary coalition, There is, however, a second alternative, which we called Qualified Voluntary Coalition, or QVC. QVC would be similar to simple voluntary coalition because, after an election, parties would negotiate with one another to form a government. Parties wanting to work together would form a coalition, and those who don't form the opposition. However, with QVC, parties would have to work within certain parameters. There would be a cross-community safeguard. It would not be possible, for example, to form a government comprised only of nationalists or a government comprised only of unionists. There would need to be some form of cross-community representation. There are different ways this could be achieved. For example, a requirement that there must be ministers from all three backgrounds in the government: unionist, nationalist, and neither unionist nor nationalist. Parties would therefore have some flexibility in terms of who joins the government and who joins the opposition, but there would not be a risk of single community government. With a cross-community safeguard in place, people felt a bit more relaxed about exploring the potential benefits of QVC. People liked that it would create a clearer system of government and opposition. People also felt that cooperation between different parties would be better in a QVC, because only those parties who actively want to work together would be in the government, and no party could hold the whole system to ransom. That being said, some people thought that QVC would have weaknesses. Some wondered, for example, how long it would take after an election for parties to reach a coalition agreement. This could take a long time. Others pointed out that it could be tricky agreeing on a definition of cross-community safeguard. Having considered all three options, participants were asked how far they would support the different models of government for Northern Ireland. The least popular option was simple voluntary coalition. People generally thought that Northern Ireland was not quite ready for this form of government. On the other hand, participants were evenly split on mandatory coalition and QVC. Even though mandatory coalition has its weaknesses, some people feel nervous about tinkering with the system. Others felt that QVC could make governments more stable whilst protecting cross-community representation. But some wondered whether negotiations to form a government could take too long. Overall, participants argued that they needed more information. These are big decisions, and people felt that the debate about the future of power sharing so far has lacked accessible and understandable information. People worried that decisions could be taken without the public's knowledge and without the public's consent. Whilst the deliberative forum did not result in a consensus position in terms of how Northern Ireland should be governed, there was strong cross-community consensus that the time has come for an inclusive and informed public conversation about institutional reform.